Hello, I'm Michael Depp, editor of TVNewsCheck, and this week I am with Paige Albiniak, a contributing writer to TVNewsCheck, and we are talking TV. Talking TV is made possible by Making the Media, a podcast from Avid, exploring the forces that shape the media, news, and entertainment business. The latest episode features Avid's Craig Wilson interviewing Bruce McCormick from an initiative called Project Origin. That's a coalition of the BBC, CBC Radio-Canada, the New York Times, and Microsoft, and it's dedicated to ensuring viewers can trust the media that they are watching. Making the Media is available on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor FM, and other podcast platforms. Give it a try. Welcome back, Paige.
Hello, Michael. I haven't been on for a while.
I know, it's good to see you. Glad to talk to you again. And this week, Paige, we are going to talk about your story that you've done for us on the return to work among television stations. I just want to mention to our viewers and listeners before we have that conversation that Paige's story is only available to TVNewsCheck Premium members. And if you become such a member, you support top-tier coverage of this industry by veteran reporters like Paige, and it gives you access to stories with depth and context that you won't find elsewhere in the world of commoditized industry journalism. So subscribe. So Paige, returning to work, it was all looking so good for a while.
Yeah.
People were getting vaccinated, COVID rates were dropping, people were beginning to return to stations for at least part of the week, and then Delta. Just how thorough has this variant bollocks the return to work path that stations were starting to lay out?
I mean, it definitely delayed it. I think that when I've been working on this story since the end of May, and it changed constantly, and it's still going to change more. So the story that I wrote for you is a moment in time, and it will all change again. But I think everybody thought they were going to be back at Labor Day. That was the big plan across the industry, and everybody was making plans for it. And I would also say that up until July 19th, which is when the studio and the studios and the unions had that agreement, I don't think anybody was expecting to do mandated vaccinations. But I think once the unions sort of agreed that that could be a thing, then you saw Netflix go and you saw Disney go. And I don't know a ton about Disney, but the fact that Disney is doing it is interesting, which we can get into later. Yeah. But yeah, I think but for everybody, it's delayed things. And then as you see in the story, companies that came back now are back to masking, and then for a lot of productions, they took a brief respite of not masking and kind of trying to go back to normal. And that lasted like 2 weeks, especially in Los Angeles. Like they barely went back to normal for any time at all.
Right. Now, something that was interesting is there was a deep reticence among the station groups to talk about this subject at all, either on or off the record. So how do you account for that?
I mean, I think that is largely from a corporate level. So to try to get a corporate representative to discuss this was basically impossible. And I think at first I thought it was because of liability. They were concerned about getting sued. That might still be the case. I actually think, I'm going to use an example that's not in the story, but to explain why I think what they're worried about. So I was listening to the New York Times, the argument today, and they were talking about this issue with Basecamp, which is a company that does like a cloud-based internal communication system. And they ruled on their own cloud-based internal communication system that nobody could talk about politics or like social justice issues because it was too divisive. And like 2 weeks later, 30% of the company had handed in their resignation. So I think amongst these companies, their fear is if they mandate vaccination or they don't want to put themselves out there too much because the issue is so sensitive and so politicized and so divisive that they don't want to alienate their employees, and they're already having trouble with employee retention. And they're having trouble with hiring. So I think one thing I really thought about in doing this story is, I probably, like everybody else, have strong feelings about how this should all be going down, which I will not reveal here. But I think that you have to have a lot of empathy. As a leader, you have to have a lot of respect, even if you don't agree. you have to have respect for how your employees feel, and you have to manage accordingly. And so it's very challenging for them right now to try to figure out policies they can put in place that sort of handles the safety issues, but also doesn't alienate their employees.
And yet, we have the prospects of mandatory vaccinations now. Netflix, the Washington Post, even Fox Corp are mandating. And they're getting the backing of the White House in doing so. Biden today said, we've got your back. So do you see any cracks in that prospect among the station groups?
I mean, with how this has gone, I would be crazy to say, no, absolutely, it's going to stay as it is. It could change. I think the fact that Fox has changed it is very interesting. That's maybe a separate conversation, but there's been stories about what Fox talks about on Fox News Prime and what's going on at Fox Corporation are two different things. So, but do I think it's possible? Yes. I do think what's different for station groups than the other kinds of big companies is that station groups are basically one big umbrella corporation with a bunch of little corporations run at the local level. And so in most of those cases, I think those stations are run like separate little businesses. So the GMs are really being left to make those decisions. So maybe you would see it at the local level, or this was reported in a story that Paul Greeley did, but WRAL in Raleigh gave employees an incentive to show proof of vaccination. I think they got $50. So I think you could see stuff like that.
Okay. So I think you touched a little on this, but now going forward, what are stations doing differently as a result of the Delta variant? Are they bringing back the most stringent level of protocols? Are they modifying their in-station behavior significantly?
I don't think so. I think first of all, I don't think they ever went back to any kind of normal behavior. I think they were still masking and social distancing. I think talent isn't masked, obviously, but they were sitting far apart still. So I think probably the main difference is bringing back indoor masking. I think that had kind of gone away, and that is coming back. I also think they hadn't really brought everybody back yet, a lot of people. So that just sort of got halted. It's not like everyone came back and then they went away. They hadn't really come back yet anyway.
Right. I know the crews were meeting out at stories. They weren't getting to the same vans with each other anymore. Did you come across any of that? Is that still the practice, that they're meeting up at a story location?
Yeah, I actually think that piece of it, like the reporters and the photographers in the field, I think that might become a more permanent change of the pandemic, is they'll come into the office less in general because they don't need to. It's kind of a waste of their time. They're almost better off just staying out in the field, and they can file to the station without ever coming in. So why come in?
Right, exactly. So meanwhile, production companies are moving ahead with live production, studio audiences. How you brought up the Jay Leno's new game show, Nick Cannon's show is coming up and starting to film next month. So how are they dealing with this?
Now, they are doing mandated vaccines for their audiences. They can, because if under, that's an individual, you're making a choice as an audience member to attend. So they're a private entity and they can require vaccinations. And so either you adhere to that or you don't come. It's no skin off their back. So, I think all those productions it was incredibly hard to produce without live audiences. You Bet Your Life and Nick Cannon are new, so they don't know, but I just talked to Alex Duda, who's the executive producer of Kelly Clarkson, and they're also bringing back live vaccinated audiences. And, it's just hard to generate the same kind of energy for those kinds of shows if you don't have an audience in front of you. So I think that's really important to them.
Just ask the U.S. women's soccer team how not having a live crowd can impact.
Yeah. I mean, so in that case, I think there's some normalcy coming back that way, but those audiences will probably still walk in masked, and maybe they will unmask for shots, or like in the case of You Bet Your Life, the audience will be there and I think masked, and I don't think they show up on camera. You just hear them. Okay. So then you can keep them masked. But I think the prevalence of masks, or people thought we were done with that. And obviously we are not, and especially not indoors. So I think productions are basically going back to how they were operating in the spring.
Yeah, obviously not where we wanted to be at this point in the almost late summer. but it is the hand that we have been dealt. So we will, obviously, as you said, it continues to be a moving target, and we'll have you following it as it keeps moving and see where we land as the months go on with this pandemic. So always good to talk to you, Paige. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Michael. Good to be here.
Cheers. A new episode of Talking TV is available most Fridays on TVNewsCheck.com. You can also listen and subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and Spotify.